but we do have a presence there for our general needs housing. So the bit that I think is pertinent to this discussion, it's probably about 7 years ago, because we've been in supported housing for so long, we really understand the customers that come to live with us and understand the whole area really of commissioning and contracting. And we realised 7 years ago, not a surprise to many of you, that the customers that we were getting through into our services were far more complex than they had been historically. And that's partly money, isn't it? Commissioners, you know, delivering services for those they most need to. And I think generally there's a lot of individuals that have more complex presentations than perhaps did in the early years when I started in supported housing. So we had a choice as an organisation whether we carry on, because if we were going to carry on doing it, we'd need to invest. And we always believe that we're going to do something, we have to do it properly. So we decided to take quite a big investment from Home Group Board, and we set up a whole clinical infrastructure into Home Group so that we could work better. If I'm honest, with both the NHS and clinical commissioning groups and social care, but we really wanted to make sure our services faced health and supported health. And then you don't need me to tell you, in the last 2 to 3 years with the whole of COVID and everything else, that's just grown and grown. And so we've developed lots of services that are really there to support health and social care. And we're very proud of that, and we hope to continue. And I suppose the other bit that's worth saying is we are just about, is it April next week or the week after, to launch our next 5-year strategy, which only grows and develops what we're doing with health and care and housing. So I'm very glad about that we haven't, that we're going to carry on using that level of investment and grow. We've had some phenomenal growth this year across services. So that's all I'll say. The main event really is to listen to both Rosie and Greg. So I'll move across to them. And as I've said, for those, we're 66 now. So those that have joined post me just saying, don't forget, stay on mute. We'll take questions at the end, but I'll curate any questions on the chat as we go through. And if there's something that's really useful to everyone to hear, then I'll intervene between the two presentations and allow for a little bit of that. Brill. Okay, so I think I'm just going to hand over to Rosie.
Yeah, I'll see if I can share my screen. And apology if I'm looking off in all directions. I've got 3 screens with slides and different things, and I still can't see if anybody sticks their hand up. So if anybody does have a question, you might need to shout out. Tell me when this...
I'll see the hands, Rosie, don't you worry. You just...
Perfect. That's fine.
And that's on, Rosie.
It's on?
It's
Brilliant.
on.
Perfect. So as Rachel mentioned, I'm Rosie. I work as part of the new Models of Care team at Home Group. So I'm going to talk you through a bit more detail about our mental health pathway, what it is, how it works, and just share some information about the different services that we include in the pathway, and talk a little bit about how they link up together. So I just wanted to start briefly with a bit of information about why we developed the pathway. So Home Group, as Rachel mentioned, we've been delivering mental health services up and down the country for numerous years, and we've got a range of different services, everything from complex accommodation services all the way down to kind of wellbeing services, outreach, float and support, and pretty much everything in between. But historically, the way services were purchased they were usually block purchased by the local authority or health, and they were always aimed at supporting a specific client group. So they were modelled based on the needs of the individuals within that client group, and that they were aimed at supporting, and largely that's what they did. They did what they were supposed to do. But some of the issues came where we found we had quite increased demand for services. So the demand for the service was quite significantly larger than the capacity. We also found that we regularly received referrals for services that weren't appropriate for the level of support being provided. And again, I know Rachel touched on this, but we had services where we had things like Monday to Friday 9 till 5 support models in place with support coordinators, with no clinical infrastructure or anything in place, but we were getting referrals for people with really quite complex needs who really needed 24/7 support, and again clinical support and all of those type of things. And so that was obviously becoming a bit of a difficulty. And then the other thing that we found was that we quite often had difficulties moving customers on from services and helping people to manage that transition, particularly from things like supported accommodation into independent living. And obviously there's a few contributing factors that can cause those issues. As Rachel mentioned, you know, a lot of it comes down to funding, and there's just not enough. There's not enough funding, and that means that there's not always enough mental health services available to meet the demand. But we reflected on it, and we don't think that that's kind of the only cause of this. So one of the things that we found was it was often the case that there's a lack of knowledge and transparency around what services are available in each area and how they can be assessed. And a good example of this is recently in the last year, I've been attending quite a lot of community transformation programs up and down the country. And it's a bit of a running joke that the first thing, and no matter what group I go to, the first thing everybody suggests that they really need is a brochure of local services, because nobody actually knows what's out there and how to refer into it and all of those type of things. And that's coming from a meeting that's a co-production meeting between providers and commissioners, so people who really should know what's out there. So you can imagine how hard that is for customers to then navigate as well and know what support that they're entitled to and what's available. So the pathway model is all about us working in partnership with commissioners and other key stakeholders and providers to understand what services are already in place, and then using that to try and identify where there are gaps in the provision. And then we use that to develop services that fit those gaps and link in with other providers and services to create a model that allows patients to flow through the services and adapt as their needs change, or adapt the levels of support they receive as their needs change. So it also helps to avoid customers being forced into services that don't or can't provide the support they need, because we try and ensure that the service is there to match kind of all levels of complexity. So that might be those at that higher end that I mentioned before, but it can also be those at that lower end of the scale who just need that light touch support to help with things like independent living. So people who potentially are stepping down from either supported accommodation or ward-based services or community treatment teams, and are then having to adapt from receiving quite intensive support to being able to live independently. So we often find that things like housing and social floating support services have been cut, which obviously means that it is quite a big gap or a big jump in from people to move from one service to completely independent living. So the key to the whole model, it's all about recognising that individual circumstances and needs change regularly, and it's about having that relationship and connection between the services to allow for some flexibility in the support provided to be able to accommodate for that. So in terms of how the pathway works, I've already talked a little bit about this, but it's about us working in partnership to really understand what provision is already in place and really understanding where there are gaps, and then trying to develop services specifically to fit those gaps. So helping to ensure that there is support available for customers no matter what their support needs are. I'll not go into our support models too much because Greg will cover that in the next bit, but all of the services we deliver within the pathway are aimed at re-ablement, and it's all about supporting individuals to live as independently as possible within the community. So we can offer any of the services that I'm going to talk you through within the pathway as single or standalone services. And where we do that, we try and liaise closely with other providers and understand other support services available in the area to try and establish links and cross-referral pathways to help join those services up together. So it's about trying to create options for customers to step up and down as their support needs change. But where able, what we really want to do with the pathway is to work in partnership with NHS and local authority providers to deliver a more enhanced pathway of care. So that might include a range of services, so things like hospital discharge, step down, supported living and outreach support, which then allows us to create a bit more of a full pathway for individuals suffering with their mental health, with smooth transitions between services and improved patient flow. So one of the benefits of developing the larger pathways, it was mentioned briefly on the other slide, but is a bit of economy of scale as well. So I know Greg will mention it and talk about our kind of clinical infrastructure, but Home Group do have clinicians. We've got quite established clinical teams that work both centrally and at a local level. And one of the things we're really passionate about is having clinicians within our mental health pathways, as this doesn't just allow us to provide therapeutic support to customers, but it also allows us to provide support and training to our frontline colleagues and to really upskill their knowledge. And in localities where we can deliver those more complex mental health pathways, we can often do things like cost in a clinician or a clinical team at a local level who's then able to provide enhanced support and training for the colleagues, not just in one service and not just in a kind of complex supported living, but across all of the tiers of that pathway. And one of the biggest benefits to that is it's about the support that our staff receive, and it's about our staff being able to recognise any signs of mental health deterioration. And when they do notice that deterioration, to be able to have quick access to the clinical support they need to be able to manage that quickly. So it's all about early access to support and intervention, not just for the customer or the patient, but also for the staff as well, to help manage things as well as possible and prevent avoidable admission or readmission into secondary care services. So the pathway, what is the pathway? So there's quite a lot to this, and I'll talk through it fairly briefly, but if anybody has any questions, by all means, just let me know. But the pathway starts with our community wellbeing services. So these are services which provide preventative support to individuals within the community. So they're all aimed at avoiding the need for secondary care intervention, but also about providing a step-down support to those who have been in hospital or accommodation-based services, or who've been receiving treatment from things like community treatment teams. So it's about helping those people manage when they're discharged from those services into independent living. And it's about helping to avoid any preventable relapse and readmission to services once they have been discharged to the community. So we recognise that different customers have different and varying needs. So we've designed all of the services within particularly that community wellbeing space to have a bit of flexibility to them. So we can deliver any of the services within that kind of model to be delivered on a one-to-one basis. We can deliver services as part of a group or a hub. We deliver support face-to-face, as well as we also have the facilities to provide a lot of support remotely as well. And that could be via telephone, web chat, video, social media, all sorts of things. And we've got examples of where we use that in lots of different services. But the way we do it is we work closely with each customer to find the right approach for them. So in terms of the type of services that includes, I'll not talk through all of them, but I'll go through a few. But our housing support service, I'll talk through first. We're obviously a national housing provider, so supporting those who present with a housing need is our bread and butter. It's something we do best. And when we talk about housing need, what we mean is it could be somebody who is classified as being homeless or is having no fixed abode, and it could be about supporting them in accessing safe and secure housing. But it could also be somebody who's at risk of losing their home, either due to failure to maintain a tenancy, or somebody who's experiencing unsafe living conditions, or somebody who just needs more support to be able to live independently, whether that be manage their finances, access benefits, understand how to just maintain a household, all of those type of things. So within that service, our team will assess a customer to understand their need and work collaboratively to identify the right solution for them. And that could involve helping an individual to access benefits, manage their finances. It could be about helping them to engage in training or education or access other services within the community. The next one is our wellbeing and recovery sessions. So they're quite broad in their nature because they cover quite a range of activities, and the activities that are provided usually determined by the needs and wants of the service users, but they can include things like community walks, art classes, music sessions, wellbeing support, gardening groups, education, coffee mornings. It can be pretty much anything. They're all essentially aimed at helping people to learn new skills, build self-esteem, and reduce any feelings of isolation. Within those schemes as well, we also provide training for people who want to become things like volunteers or peer support workers and things like that. And we also deliver befriending services as well, that kind of probably sit across all of these different services. We then have our physical health sessions. So they provide a variety of physical activity, but also education on topics such as things like smoking cessation, sexual health, and how to eat a balanced diet on a budget. But they also are about supporting customers in attending external physical health checks as well. So the key aims of those sessions are about providing customers with the knowledge, skills, and confidence to manage their own physical health. We then have the social prescribing service, which allows us to accept referrals from both health professionals, but also self-referrals from the communities to help support individuals who feel like they're struggling with their mental health. And what we do is we carry out an assessment to identify the support need and then help the customer in accessing that support. So it might be about signposting them to another community-based service, or it might be about trying to provide that support in-house as well. With our Housing First and Transition service, we use the fact that we're a national housing provider with lots of general needs stock across the UK to our advantage. And what that does is it allows us to be quite innovative in our approach to meeting the housing and support needs of customers, particularly those who might have quite a lot of difficulty in finding a home. So that could be somebody with a history of arrears, it could be somebody with forensic history or dual diagnosis, quite complex needs, those type of things, or who have been homeless for a long period of time. But as part of our Housing First and Transition services, we can help provide customers with stable, fully furnished homes from which they can start to rebuild their lives. So we create bespoke and individually tailored support packages in partnership with the customers to effectively support people who have experienced homelessness and additional complex needs, and try and empower them to become part of their local communities. In terms of the funding for these schemes, they're varied very much depending on locality. So we've got schemes all over the place and they're all funded slightly differently. Some of them are funded through local authority, as similar to what I said before, like block purchased, where they've purchased a Housing First scheme, and we've got a set number of support coordinators that work within that team, and it's all kind of modelled in collaboration. We've also got services that are funded through housing benefits, so where we've worked with the housing benefit team within the local authority to use some of the service charge to fund things like intensive housing management support. So that comes out of the housing management budget for those who need it. And then we also have services that are funded by things like Section 117 funding, personal health budgets. So there's lots of different ways we can look to provide that service. Moving up the pathway, we then offer our remote crisis service, or alternative to crisis service. So this involves us working alongside the crisis or psychiatric liaison teams and accepting referrals for individuals who have contacted crisis, but who have been identified as having a housing or social support need that might be contributing to their mental health decline. So the support offered can include things like advocacy and advice. It can include practical support or emotional support, and assistance can be given in lots of different areas, but it might include things like supporting people with long-term tenancy management. It might be about helping people to find alternative accommodation, helping somebody to maintain the safety and security of their home, help people to manage finances or benefit claims. It might be providing emotional support and advice, supporting people to access appropriate services relating to mental health, helping to develop domestic or life skills as well as social skills and behaviour management. We could be providing advice, advocacy or liaison with relevant agencies, and we also carry out things like risk assessments as well to help in establishing personal safety and security. And we've got, just looking at some of the services we've already got set up, we've got some really great results from this service. So we've got a service in Durham that was set up a year ago, and we carried out a 6-month study of that Durham service to see what the outcomes of people where we provided that support were, where they went on to kind of 28 days after they were discharged from the service. And we found that 91% of the patients seen remained within the community and didn't recontact crisis or didn't get admitted to secondary care, which is obviously really positive. The next service we've got is our crisis accommodation or step-up services. And they're designed to provide a short-term placement for people who have reached a level of crisis and distress that it can't really be resolved in their home. So it acts as a bit of an alternative to an inpatient provision. So it's about combining the therapeutic advantages of inpatient services, but in an environment that maintains skills, supports recovery and builds well-being as well. The services are always CQC registered, and they're always led by a clinically registered manager whose job it is to oversee any risk formulation and management, medication, and they work in partnership with the inpatient services and statutory community mental health teams as well. We then have the hospital discharge service. So what that does is that offers housing support for patients both in a ward-based setting and then following discharge in the community to make sure that, again, they manage that transition out of the ward. And it involves us working on the wards alongside the ward-based teams, providing support for those who have been identified as having a housing or social support need. There's a range of support provided. It's all, in terms of the actual type of support, it's quite similar to that of the crisis support service. But the primary aim of this service is it's about ensuring that patients have access to safe and secure housing, so that when they're deemed to be medically fit for discharge, housing isn't a barrier. So it's really all about trying to prevent that delayed discharge. And again, we've got some really good outcomes for this. So the Teesside Hospital Discharge Service we set up in March last year. And again, we carried out a bit of a study to see what the impact of the service was on inpatient stay. And we found that we managed to reduce the average duration of inpatient stay for individuals just with a housing need by an average of over 70 days per person, which equated to a saving of around 28k per person. So that's, again, just to help. It's obviously providing quite a large return on investment, as well as actually helping those people get out in the community and avoid, extended stays in hospital that aren't potentially needed. We then have our step down and discharge to assess services. So they're designed to support people who are recovering from mental health crisis that might have led to short or long-term inpatient care. So these services offer community-based accommodation and support for those who are medically suitable for discharge, but who might still require some longer-term care, or they might be awaiting things like social care assessment or home adaptations. So it allows them to wait of those things in the community rather than on a ward. And again, in terms of outcomes, one of our step-down services in Manchester, when we set up that service, it was initially set up as a pilot, and the trust conducted their own study to find out kind of what the effects of the service were, and they found that it helped to achieve a reduction of average nightly bed cost of 69%. So again, quite a significant return on investment for the service. We then have our independent supported living services, and they provide community-based accommodation and support for individuals with enduring mental health conditions. So the level of support in these services is flexible, and it's always designed around customer and commissioner requirements, but they're all accommodation-based services, and they offer a range of, it could be self-contained units, it could be shared accommodation, it could be dispersed properties. Often what we do is we create what we call a hub and spoke model, so where customers might initially live within a centralised or core building where there might be access to a little bit more intensive support. But as they develop their independent living skills, they quite often move out into one of our dispersed properties within the community. All of the ISL services support people to learn and develop their life skills, but the support model provided just varies depending on the support need of the customers. So we have some services where, like I mentioned earlier, we have Monday to Friday 9 to 5 support, or maybe just a concierge through the night, so light touch kind of night support. And we have some which are more focused on supporting people with more intensive support needs. So they might have clinical colleagues that are embedded at that local service level. We've got services that are registered with CQC, and others that are just supported by our central clinical team as well. And then lastly, within the pathway, we've also got our floating and outreach support services, which crosses over slightly with our community wellbeing, but I wanted to talk about it a little bit in its own right. This service is aimed at individuals living within the community who need more intensive or one-to-one support. So again, it could be those who are stepping down from accommodation services or community treatment teams. It can also sometimes be people who are stepping up from community wellbeing teams or community wellbeing services. So somebody who's in a group session, but their circumstances have changed and they've got an escalation of symptoms as well. And it's about kind of giving them access to that more intensive support. So the service allows us to engage with customers within their own homes, supported living services, or from central community-based hubs. And the support provided is focused on empowering individuals to increase their independence and take control of their own mental and physical health needs. So each of the outreach services vary depending on the needs of the customers, but it could include housing support, social support, mental or physical health support. And the duration of support provided per customer per week is just going to be determined by customer needs. So it's always quite flexible. It's usually the case that when somebody enters a service, somebody will receive more intensive support, and that as they improve, this will be phased down over time. But again, the nature of that model is it allows us to increase that support if somebody needs it. And again, circumstances have changed and they need a little bit more support. Lastly, I just wanted to give a little bit of an example of where we have quite an established mental health pathway. So obviously we talked through the pathway in its entirety and all of the different services we offered, but I thought it might be useful to talk about somewhere where we have kind of that flow, if you like, and that kind of group of services that linking quite closely together. So in Durham, we've been working in partnership with the local authority and health trust for a number of years, far many more years than I've been working at Home Group. And within the region, we provide remote crisis support, we provide hospital discharge service, we have independent supported living schemes, and that's both within core buildings but also dispersed property as well. We then have outreach support and a range of community wellbeing services, including wellbeing and recovery, physical health, befriending, volunteering and housing support as well. We also have quite a large number of general needs properties within the region, which just strengthens that offer a little bit further, particularly when we encounter people who really are struggling to access housing and property. It allows us to be a little bit more flexible and think a little bit outside the box to see what else we can do to support that person. But one of the biggest benefits of having that real established pathway is the relationship between each of the services. So staff that work in each of the teams in Durham are really aware of the other support models, and that includes the level of support that the services offer, a real good understanding of when that service might be best suited to a customer and any eligibility or exclusion criteria. There's also simple systems and procedures in place to provide things like standardisation across the entire pathway. So just simple things like they all work on the same patient note system, which makes things like cross-referral much easier. And one of the things that makes this pathway so successful is the gateway service. So I talked a little bit earlier about economy of scale when you do develop these kind of more established pathways, and gateway is a really good example of this. So gateway is essentially funded a little bit from all of the individual services. And what that team does is they accept all referrals into the service. They then contact the customers to really ensure that they understand what the individual's needs are, and then they support the customers into the right service. So that obviously it simplifies the referral process. There's just one route in and there's no confusion, one referral form, all of those things. But it also helps by doing things like it helps avoid people being sent to the wrong services as well. So avoids people having kind of delayed access to the support they need by being sent to the wrong service and sitting in a waiting list and all of those things. And it also helps to manage any potential increased demand in the services, as the gateway team are really aware of the capacity in each service and the current caseload. So they're really aware of what services are oversubscribed and where there are gaps and things like that. So they can help to navigate this and help support customers to access that support as quickly as possible. And then the team also help with movement between services. So for example, if a customer in the wellbeing and recovery service has escalating mental health symptoms, it's the gateway team that helps support them to access one-to-one support to make sure they get into that service quickly and can help de-escalate their symptoms as quickly as possible. Again, trying to prevent them from further escalation and avoidable admission into secondary care. So hopefully that all makes sense. Apologies, I feel like I've just talked very quickly for 20 minutes. But there was quite a lot to fit in. We're currently, if it helps, we're currently developing a brochure which explains everything I've just covered in more specifics and with even more details about each of the services, and that hopefully should be finished in the next couple of weeks, and we will be happy to send it out to everyone who's attended the session. But we'll also be happy to answer any questions either now or at the end of the session, or if anybody wants to email or get in touch after the session, that would also be fine. But otherwise I will hand over to Greg.
Yeah, thank you very much, Rosie. There was a lot packed into that, you're right. But as you say, there's resources that people can look at that after or listen again or whatever. So I'm very conscious of time. So I think, there was one question, but Greg has kindly agreed to answer it in his presentation. So that's even better. So we'll go straight over to Greg, and then hopefully we'll have a little bit of time for some general questions at the end. Thank you.
Can everybody see that?
Yes.
Am I sharing? Okay.
Yeah.
Fortunately, I've lost sight of everyone. So apologies. So hi, yeah, my name's Greg Hall. I'm a nurse consultant in mental health. I am, as Rachel said, quite a new employee to Home Group. I started on January the 10th, so I'm maybe in my 9th week now. And I'd like to tell you a little bit about myself, really, to give you some context as to why I actually have come to work with Home Group. So I qualified in '96 as a fresh-faced RMN and went looking for, I suppose, the exciting side of psychiatry, and went to High Secure, where I was a staff nurse and a charge nurse across personality disorder, mental illness units, male, female, acquired brain injury, number of specialist areas, and it gave me quite a grounding really in what mental health looked like for a number of people, but at the same time it was pretty specialist in respect of secure settings. I moved into nurse education for a number of years, teaching on nurse training and offender management programs, looking at offender health as well and supporting around that. And then I suppose I've followed a pathway, if you like, the patient journey for many of the people that I supported and nursed through medium secure into locked rehabilitation until around about 2014. I think I finally made it through the gate into the community. And that's where I started to come to understand the challenges really of community mental health and support and what that looked like. So my first role was with a provider providing bespoke individual tenancies for people to move out of long stay, complex and forensic services. And essentially that's been my area of specialism for some years now, working as an assessor and also as a trainer for staff working in those environments, and kind of leads to that question Amy asked about the skills of our workforce. So I'll come to that further in the presentation. When I have worked for previous employers and providers, they've had a model. It's been a model. This is what we provide. This is our bespoke package, and we've gone to commissioners and said, this is what we provide. Would you like it? To me, that doesn't meet the needs of everyone. So when I came to Home Group, this idea then, and when we think about how I see things, is very much quite fundamental. We think about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, housing, the importance of that, having that shelter, that stability, that place what we can call home, just can't be underestimated really, the importance of that as a foundation in our lives. Then to making sure that we have a level of health and well-being, and that comes obviously from the people around us, the support that we're given, the lifestyles that we lead, and the access to healthcare that many of us take for granted, making sure that that is the next level that sits above our stability of having a home. Again, going back to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, what comes next? It's being involved, it's being connected with our communities, our families, our friends, having those opportunities to engage with people, to learn new skills, to have models of occupation, things that drive us, things that give us our sense of identity. So to me, that's been a fundamental framework really for me to understand life, illness, recovery. So to see the challenges in the community and what that looks like, or those gaps, where do we provide that housing? Where, the health, the social care and housing, does it come separate? Is it piecemeal? In some areas, you might be living in a fantastic accommodation, but you're not receiving the health and social care support that you need. Or, as for many of our customers that we see living in the community, they may have good access to health and social care, but the quality of accommodation is dire. The impact upon their mental health and their physical health. I couldn't quote you the numbers. I did attend a conference around King's Fund, who provided a lot of information around the impact of poor housing and what that looks like for people, their mental health and their social needs. So to work for an employer, an organisation, a charity such as Home Group, really, who are that social enterprise that look to support every vulnerable person in society. And when we talk through some of the range of provision that we have, we can talk about and understand that significant vulnerability that sits with many people who remain in hospitals, treatment centres, residential care, and the risks that they also face from a safeguarding perspective and from failure to thrive perspective. But when we look at those dates, this is over 80 years ago. Home group existed before Maslow even spoke about what hierarchy of needs are. So to me, that really kind of sits there around what home groups raison d'etre, what their mission has been since its conception back in 35, recognizing that if we provide good quality homes, then independence and aspiration can follow. So I won't talk too much about home group. Rachel has already done that, and Rosie had, but I would like to just emphasize one or 2 points. Obviously, being a registered charity and a provider of social housing, but also making that extra step to say, well, what else do people need in life, and creating those specialist care services. Being involved and leading, really, I suppose, the design and the development of what those services look like, working in partnership with our commissioners to create that integrated housing, health and social care offer. We're able to then manage complexity in the community. Too often we feel that a person's needs, because they are complex, and when I talk about complex, I talk about dual diagnoses, we talk about coexisting conditions, substance and alcohol, all of those things that can destabilize a person in their life in the community. So it's aiming to have a model of care and support that can actually support people in the community with those complex needs. It is a strategic objective for the organisation. I'd go so far as to say it's the social conscience of home group. If we can't reach everyone in society, then there's an injustice there. So yeah, the drive is there to meet everybody's needs. But we can't just simply make a promise to do that. If we haven't got a skill set, if we don't have this infrastructure, we don't have the colleagues to be able to support that complexity of need that sits within the community, then we're going to fail. So it's incumbent upon us really to make sure that we've got that quality of provision that's backed up with a clinical infrastructure. And to do that, we need to make sure that we work effectively within clinical governance, that we make sure that everything that we do is evidence-based, it's meeting the needs of the individual from a values base, but also from an economies of scale base. As Rosie talked about, being able to provide services is often very reliant upon how we're able to fund those services. So having that effective clinical governance model, making sure that we do operate safely and effectively. Similar slide to as what Rosie showed you, so I'm not going to go through particularly all of the elements, but I would like to comment a little bit more around probably transforming care, and also perhaps around our psychologically informed environments, because that's kind of my background and it's my area of focus at the moment as a new part of our business, transforming care, which I think when we think about the language, transforming care is obviously an agenda to support people, particularly with LD and autism, to live safely and effectively in the community. But it's more than that. Transforming care is about transforming all aspects of complex care for me. How can we provide care in the community and get it right? So we have a number of services across the country. We've developed in Kent, we're in Hertfordshire, we're in Leeds and Hull, Birmingham, Swindon, and looking to develop partnerships or have partnerships in development in Norfolk, in Northampton, and Gloucestershire, I believe, as well, is being muted, because there is a need there. There's a real need to make sure that we have partners. When I'm talking about partnership working, we're able to provide the accommodation, the bespoke accommodation that's absolutely required. Now, either that becomes a conversion of an existing property, or more increasingly, the development of new bespoke properties to meet the needs of our customers. We have significant our customers have significant needs around what that building looks like for them. to provide consistency, sensory, appropriate environments, to make sure that they're safe and that the staff are able to support the individual in those practical things of just mobility for some, but also safety and access to the community. A number of our customers are supported under a legal framework that requires some level of restriction on their access to the community or various items or things that could increase risk. So we have to make sure that our approach to supporting those individuals works effectively for them, but also is creating an environment that gives them opportunity and chance to take positive risk, but in the safest way that we can do that. And we can't do that on our own if we don't work in partnership with those that absolutely know that individual. So we make sure that transition is a significant period whereby we get to know that customer, they get to know us. Our teams are built around that customer. We look at what their needs are, but also what their preferences are, and develop a team that can support that individual to transfer into a community setting, into their own home in the community, with as little a disruption as possible. When I say little disruption, the reality of it is a significant destabilizing factor for many individuals to make those moves. So again, it comes back to that well thought out transitional period, working with our colleagues in statutory services to make that transition as effective as possible. Moreover, when we think about the individuals that we're working with and their complex needs, increasingly, as many of you are fully aware, we are seeing the impact of trauma, of attachment, separation, and what that looks like as an impact upon the well-being of our customers. So we ensure that, again, we work in a psychologically informed way. So we take evidence-based, we work around NICE guidelines, whether that be personality disorder, autism, learning disabilities, mental health. It's working in the most effective and clinically recognised ways possible. And we do that by around having a framework for the way that we support people within our services. And we talk about life, living independently and feeling enabled. That's the aim for our customers. And we have our main principles that I'm sure many of you are quite familiar with, the idea of working in a person-centered, centric way. And when we think about for individuals that may lack capacity or are unable to communicate what their needs are, then we also recognise that importance of working with families, with those that know the individuals best, and that often is you as clinicians, you as commissioners, who are, seeking the most appropriate and bespoke approach to that individual's care. As I mentioned, psychologically informed, and also thinking about skills and strengths-based approach to supporting our customers, but never forgetting about the impact of that physical health that often sits alongside mental ill health. We know about, quite frankly, the tragedy that is short life expectancy for people with a significant mental health diagnosis or learning disability. So it's incumbent upon us really to do all that we can to recognise the challenges of physical ill health. We have clinical expert around in physical health, and we've worked hard to develop our approaches to supporting and maintaining people's physical health care needs, and making sure we deal with that holistically and not just focusing around their mental health needs. Well-being is a huge kind of area of consideration, but in practice for our model, it also helps us to focus and think around management of clinical risk, what is important for the person and what they may feel is important, but what actually is also important for their growth, their well-being, their safety, their security, and being able to sustain their community placement. So when we think about building the right skills, making sure we have clinical oversight and clinical interventions for our services. So we have, as I mentioned, clinical experts in positive behavioural support, in occupational therapy, in psychology, and in physical health. And these are a panel of experts that I also sit alongside in respect of nursing, mental health, and clinical risk. We're able to lead and strategically think about what clinical input these services are going to need. As Rosie said, it's very much bespoke to what's commissioned and what's needed, and is built in within those packages. It might be an OT is required within that cluster of support because that's where the focus and need is. It might be areas where psychology, either directly working with the individual in a therapeutic way, or looking at psychology and psychological support in risk management, in understanding and formulating that person's needs. And then, of course, thinking about reflection, coaching and mentoring, the importance of our teams being able to have time to reflect on their practice, to consider better ways of working, but also from a protection really for our staff. It's incumbent upon us to make sure if we are asking them to work in an incredibly challenging role at times, our duty to them is to make sure that their resilience and well-being is supported by the clinical oversight and structures that we put in place to support people through post-incident debrief, crisis response, through reflective practice, individual supervision and clinical supervision, and what we refer to as brilliant conversations. That way that as an employer we can support and understand our teams and how they are developing. I'd like to come back to the message really before I finish. I think we are overrunning. I apologise for that. For me, it's about building stability and sustainability into our partnerships. Partnerships sometimes can be considered in a short-term view, and that can sometimes often be related to a financial need or a practical need. But for me, that stability and sustainability isn't just about the partnership, it's about the person. How are we stabilizing their life? How are we sustaining their community living? And what do we need to do with our partnerships to make sure that happens? So examples have already been shared by Rosie, but we have this range of, like we say, bespoke partnerships, working with either an enhanced community recovery service in Devon, our step down service in Greater Manchester, discharge service in Tees, Esk and Weir, discharge and crisis support in Cumbria, Northumberland and Tyne, our flexible support service in Southampton, commissioned by the council, and the careers service, which I managed to speak to someone not long ago about, which I found fascinating, supporting young people in their challenges that they face as young carers, going into schools, working with those young people, with their families, with their teachers, in providing that support service for them. So what does partnership commissioning look like? Well, good partnership commissioning looks like early engagement. I'm part of an MDT that considers our customers' referrals as they come through, and to get a referral that says Johnny's going to be leaving college in 3.5 weeks' time and we need a placement for him makes my heart sink, because we will do our utmost to support Johnny, but the realities of being able to do it effectively, it takes time. Johnny needs to know a couple of years before what his future looks like, and maybe actually what those requirements of a placement might look like. So we're frequently engaging with people, particularly in transforming care, to help them look at what a pathway looks like way in advance. We're now talking about people moving into our services in March next year. What work can we do with them and with yourselves to support that transition over time? A full commitment for multidisciplinary teams, and I know that much of the commissioning is done by commissioners and not necessarily, although it's increasingly is being done by those clinicians, but making sure that we have an understanding, a commitment to working effectively together, not just at the commissioning stage, but also at an ongoing review stage and when individuals are in crisis. We don't look to point and apportion risk and blame. We don't put our hands up and say, you need to fix this. What we say is how we're going to work together to sustain that placement, how we're going to work together to understand and manage that risk. We design our services based on in-depth assessments and in reach. We will spend the time with the individual to understand what their needs are and then develop a package of support around them. We'll pool our knowledge and expertise across the board. I think we're around 55 clinicians now. Rachel may give me a different figure to that, but it's increasing significantly. So that knowledge, that expertise that sits there, I help to chair the Mental Health Practice Leads Forum, where the range of knowledge and expertise blows me away, and to be able to draw on that. We don't work in silos. We do have our own respective areas of the business that we work in, but we regularly draw across the board to be able to support that with the expertise that we have. And we do take a short and a long-term view. The short-term view is sometimes about meeting the immediate needs, those commissioning needs. When you think about what COVID did for us all and the response that we needed, and then the longer-term view, as I say, about sustainability. But it is about taking a shared approach to risk and working effectively with commission partners. I'm sorry if that went over. My contact details are there and they'll be available on the slide, and I welcome any approach from anyone who wants to talk a bit more about my role and how we can support you. And thank you.
Thank you very much, Greg, and to Rosie. So you both ran over, but who cares really? I think it's just as valuable for you to have gone through everything you did and for us to have listened and taken that in, and it's on the recording. So so we'll live with it. There was one question which the reason I'm bringing it up, I do think we should try and speak to this, which is about recruitment and how we do that. And I'll quickly say two things actually, because it's an issue that we talk about exec quite a lot around recruitment, particularly in this whole world of health and care. So we have a couple of hotspots where it's difficult, and we are putting some bespoke plans in there, but our actual offer to colleagues is very strong in Home Group. You know, we pay possibly quite a bit more than some of our other providers. We have a fabulous culture with 7th best workplace in the country for to work for, and I think we're even higher on women's view of working in Home Group. So I feel like we have a very good package, but we have entered a market which has such rapid change, and because people can move very quickly if they want to, and some haven't, you know, have worked with particular customers and found that difficult and left because of that reason, or just generally in care it's harder. So we are trying at the moment to come up with something that can stabilise that, which might be an increased offer to our colleagues in the care area rather than in the rest of Home Group. In the rest of Home Group, we're actually very stable and find it pretty easy to recruit, but it's that piece. So we haven't got the answer, but it's a key thing for us to sort. And then I think taking new people on like Greg and others who hopefully will really encourage that nurturing approach to our colleagues and try innovative stuff to keep them connected into Home Group. So on that note, there's only 3 minutes left. So we will end it there. You can contact any of us about any other questions or anything you want. Really appreciate the numbers that have attended and listened, and there's a recording. So, you know, if other colleagues want that, they can. But I think that's it, unless any of my team say, you were supposed to mention. No, we're all right. Great. So thank you, everyone, and we'll sign out. Goodbye.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Cheers.